But one manager that has tried his hand at the Premier League is Louis Van Gaal, and he's come out this week and he's continued his assault on Ed Woodward and Manchester United, calling him an evil genius for the way he got sacked following his FA Cup victory.
Well, everybody knows the way that Manchester United went about sacking Louis Van Gaal before the FA Cup final, and then immediately after, showing utter lack of class, which you wouldn't usually associate with our club. He just still doesn't sit right with me in the way that he was sacked, and also still doesn't sit right in the fact he got the job in the first place, because I said when we appointed him it wasn't the right option. He'd been out of top-end club football in Europe for 15 years, didn't really do anything at Barcelona when he was there, and only really achieved something at Bayern Munich because of the team that was built before he got there.
Was he in charge when they got to the final in 2010?
2010, yeah, and got taught a lesson by Jose.
Yeah, lost 2-0, didn't they, in the Bernabeu?
Yeah, never really even laid a glove on Inter Milan that night. It was just a wrong appointment, Ed, and particularly that season was just a complete calamity. We spoke about in a previous podcast how David Moyes may have got a bit of raw end of the deal, but didn't help himself in terms of the way he acted and way he went about trying to manage Manchester United through the most difficult transition world football will ever see. To then go and get Louis Van Gaal, who couldn't start until the end of July because he was in the World Cup with Holland. I understand.
And got all the way to the third place playoff as well.
And I understand he's got prior commitments, but we're not talking about Pep Guardiola here. We're not talking about Zinedine Zidane or Vicente Del Bosque in his prime with Spain. We're talking about Louis Van Gaal, who really hadn't won anything for a very long time in club football and hadn't really had a track record of building a team with money, because the Ajax team he built all those years ago was built through youth. And United, as we saw, because he tried a litany of youth players during his time at United, clearly the academy had been neglected so much there wasn't that quality readily available to pick from the youth system.
No, I think if he was in charge now, God forbid, with the way that you're seeing youth players, with the way that youth players are coming up through the academy now at Man United, obviously you've got he obviously gave us Marcus Rashford, you got Mason Greenwood coming up, and there's a lot of players that are highly touted in that Man United youth system. Would it be a bit different because he does like the youth approach?
No, because I think his formulaic approach to football is outdated and has been outdated for a long time. And you've even seen Jose Mourinho was a far better tactician as a manager and a far better man manager than Louis Van Gaal ever was, be found out by the fact football isn't played to a rigid tactical formation or in a formulaic manner anymore. There's so much freedom, particularly with attackers and wingers, all these hybrid type players who move around and play in between the lines. I'm not saying it'll never work if you played 3-5-2 and it were very formulaic, but I feel as though football's moved on from people like Louis Van Gaal.
Yeah, that's kind of been a vogue subject for the last 2 or 3 years, isn't it? Has football passed these certain managers by? You got the recent talk of Mourinho being left behind, and football's moved on to this almost high energy. I don't know if I don't want to call it unorganised because it's not. It might look unorganised.
Fluid and dynamic are the words I'd use.
Yeah, I think fluid is probably a good one, and that players are more free to move wherever they want. But it's still in a system that they've worked on. They will still take certain paths that they've worked on throughout the week, rather than your winger stays on the right wing and goes up and down like a train track.
Yeah, and I can understand why Louis Van Gaal took the job at Manchester United. You're never going to turn a manager's job at United down. It was just all wrong. Going back to, you sacked David Moyes in April after the defeat at Goodison Park. You then put Ryan Giggs in until the end of the season. There's that famous line from Full Time Devils. And you give yourself that 4 weeks, 2 months to find the right manager. And United could have gone and knocked on any door in world football, apart from Pep Guardiola and apart from Jose Mourinho at Chelsea. And they'd have got any manager at that point because the expectations are lowered because of what's happened post-Ferguson with David Moyes. And people see it as, I can get this team going again. It's not that far away from winning the league.
Yeah, that period was difficult. It was almost lurching from one disaster to the next. And yes, there were, under Louis Van Gaal, there were some good wins, especially against the big teams. He did get them back in the Champions League, but ultimately the football was just drab. United became a bit of a laughingstock throughout the Premier League. And then he had his own little meltdown by giving Big Sam his tactics on a piece of paper.
Oh, man. Big Sam would have been the reverse of Sir Alex Ferguson with a Rafa Benitez facts episode. You can imagine Big Sam just sat there with a pint of John Smith laughing at him.
Not bothered that he lost the game particularly, but Louis Van Gaal was giving out his tactics on printouts to journalists in his press conference.
And then he had the complete meltdown over the mince pies in a press conference. I remember that one. That was pretty funny. Enjoy a mince pie. For me, Aaron, Manchester United are the biggest club in world football. You can argue about Real Madrid, you can argue about Barcelona, Bayern Munich. It's a toss-up who's the biggest out of those four clubs. But no manager of those other three clubs would ever be allowed to wait till after a World Cup to take that job. You saw it with what Madrid did to Spain with Julian Lopetegui.
They took him before the World Cup.
2 days. So if Louis Van Gaal wasn't committed enough to Manchester United to say, all right, I'm not going to go to the World Cup with Holland, you got to go and get someone else, Aidan. You really have. And I feel as all this stuff that's coming out at the moment from him in terms of quotes about Ed Woodward, time's passed for that. You should have said that right after it happened. Now, granted, there'll be an NDA and he couldn't come out because he'd lose his money from being sacked. But at this moment in time, particularly with what we know about certain individuals in the British press who are now working for Ed Woodward in terms of boosting his PR, you're playing into the hands of the press